Okay. Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. And it's a small group tonight, but we're still going to use the microphone because we are recording this evening. And so this helps us pick up the recording. But thank you all for coming out. I know it's a beautiful evening during spring break. And so I'm really happy to see a nice crowd for our special guest, Valerie, tonight. For those of you that I don't know, I'm Morgan. I'm the executive director of the History Museum. And I am here to introduce Valerie, who really is the expert on one of the artists featured in our special exhibit here tonight. I saw a lot of you checking it out if you hadn't seen it before. Women artists of the American West, Trailblazers at the turn of the 20th century. This special exhibit will be up through July 12th. So we still have it for a few more months. And I just want to share a little bit about how we came to meet Valerie. She reached out to us very serendipitously saying, I've written a book on Frey and I have connections to Jackson Hole. Can I come and present? And so we feel really lucky to have Valerie here tonight with us. And I also want to say a big thank you to our partners, our donors, our members, and sponsors who made this exhibit possible, as well as free programming like this that we're doing tonight. So tonight, like I said, Valerie, and as we can see, we'll share about the art and life of Fra Dana, and then we'll reserve some time at the end for questions from you all. So a little bit of background on Valerie. She is a professor of art history and the director of the School of Visual and Media Arts at the University of Montana, where she has taught since 1999. Her PhD was earned with honors at the University of Kansas with a dissertation focused on the religious paintings of Rembrandt and Vermeer. Since then, she has continued to research on the special relationship between Dutch and Italian artists in the 17th century while pursuing other topics as well. Most recently, she has written a chapter on sport hunting women in America at the beginning of the 20th century, which appears in a recently published book called Hunting Troubles, Gender and Its Intersections in the Cultural History of the Hunt. Sounds fascinating. Valerie is a popular Smithsonian Journeys expert, accompanying travelers to locations in Italy and the Netherlands. So if you're looking for your next vacation, check that out too. Her book, which she co-authored with Sue Hart, is titled Fra Dana, American Impressionist in the Rockies, and it is available for sale down in our museum store. And I think after the presentation, we'll send Valerie downstairs to answer more questions and sign any books that you might want. So welcome, Valerie. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a lot that I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to hold this and talk into it. Is that too close or just right? Just right. And you can always gesture to me when it goes too far below or too close. Right. So I'm a fairly casual speaker, and so I'm not going to sit here and read my notes. So lots of times I like to take a big pile of paper and then start turning the pages, and people will be like, oh, we're going to be here all night. But you won't. I have a lot of slides, but I actually said to Morgan, don't worry, I'll be done like in 40 or 45 minutes. And she did say that her eyes got really big when she saw actually how many slides I have. But they are less than 100. Okay, so I'm going to start by showing you a portrait of Frey. Here she is, and she has a lot of names. And I'll explain to you how those names came about in just a little bit. But you can see she was born in 1874. She was born in the Paris of Indiana. And for those of you who might be confused about what the Paris of Indiana is, it's Terre Haute. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to Terre Haute, but it's not very much like Paris. But apparently at the end of the 19th century, Terre Haute really was quite cosmopolitan. And for other people who were coming from that area along the Wabash or along the Ohio rivers, getting to Terre Haute was a big deal, and it really was quite cosmopolitan. It seemed like a very sophisticated place. And so she was born there to a very distinguished family. I'll tell you more about that too, but her family background were the Maxwells, who have buildings in Bloomington at the campus. They were the leading doctors attorneys, professional staff like teachers and people at the college, and also politicians. In fact, Frey's grandfather, after whom she was named, was a judge. His name was Samuel Francis, and then she came to be called Fra Dana. In the first part of that last decade of the 19th century, she was at the Cincinnati Art Academy. And as you probably have read there, she initially wanted to be an actress, and then she noted that she really had quite a bit of talent in drawing, and she decided, I'm going to be an artist. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, because her mother, Jewel, also had been trained as an artist and had actually been sent to Dayton, another metropolis, and had studied art there. And in fact, in her journal, she said, I went to Dayton to study art with a capital A. So not just the art that one does at home where you're, following and learning, because of course, young ladies were supposed to be able to at least do some rendering. They should have been able to sit down and actually render your face or your profile. That was a talent that you had, especially in this class. And then she ended up going to Wyoming by coach in 1891 and 1893. And I'm going to, in some ways now, unfold Frey's life for you and tell you how that came about and how she ended up not only having this life of art, but also life as someone who was on a 400,000-acre ranch with her husband, Edwin Lester Dana, and helped herd, calve, brand cattle. One summer, there were 80,000 cattle that they were Herefords that they were actually getting to market back in the Midwest. So let's just take a look here at her early art education. Fra Dana went to the Art Academy of Cincinnati. This is a big deal. Cincinnati was the queen of the West. It was on the Ohio River. You went to Cincinnati because you had access to symphony, you had access to a museum, and now you had access to the Art Academy of Cincinnati. And she was sent there from Terre Haute, one side of Indiana to the other side of Indiana, by her family. And she went there as a young woman, independent, right? In 1890, she was what? In her late teens, right? This is quite remarkable in 1890 for this young woman to go off and to study art. In 1890, it was the third year that they had nude drawing for both men and women. And so she was among the very first classes to be able to actually study from the nude. And many of you probably know that women artists rarely had that opportunity. When Thomas Eakins tried it in Philadelphia, he got into a lot of trouble. It was really something quite novel for young women to be able to do this in a school that was co-ed. Now in France, even in France, if you went to France, and many, many young women went to France and studied in Paris, when they would go to various ateliers or salons and studied with a master, they would usually have very segregated classes. So women would look at nudes, and then it was only women in those schools. So you wouldn't be confused about, well, the men just got to look at a nude model and now the women do. But at Art Academy of Cincinnati, where she was for 3 years, she was able to do this, and I've actually seen her course enrollment and the grades she got. And she did quite well, and she was able to study here and work with some of the leading people in art education in the nation. One of the people with whom she actually studied was Carolyn Lord. So she had mentors or people who would actually, mentor for her, who were actually women artists. So it's important that she wasn't only learning from the leading male staff, but also by women artists like Carolyn Lord. And this is an outdoor picture. Yes, I spent a lot of time looking at those faces thinking, could one of those actually be Frey? And I spent a lot of time with photographs looking and thinking, is that Frey? Could that be Frey? But I haven't come up with any definitive answer here about that. I should say that in Cincinnati at this time, what was very popular was the Munich School. And the Munich School is something that you can still see, I think, in Frey's art. And that means that the Munich School was fairly brown, and it had strong colors and fairly intense colors. And Munich hadn't yet been infected by that new fashioned Impressionism. that was coming from France. So the Munich school had some leading teachers who ended up in Cincinnati, and they all kind of got together there. Frank Duveneck was one of them, and he was a master with whom Frey had studied. And I think that enduring idea about this stronger color is something that you continue to see in her work. This is the man to whom Frey was married for 50 years, 50. They married in 1996. He died in 1946, and they were a very close, loving couple. They were parallel, respectful pairing, and he honored her in a way that was very equal. She was someone whom he respected as an artist and as a professional. He always recognized her investment or commitment to their shared business, which was a big one. And he is someone who also came from the Midwest. He came with his family first to Hangtown, California, looking for gold. And then they ended up, of course, if you're looking for gold, you have a tendency to travel around quite a bit. And so he was in Hangtown, then they were in Phillipsburg, Montana, then they were in various other communities in Montana, until the dad, Theophilus, that's a name you don't hear very much anymore, Theophilus said, I think I could, manage in cattle. And so they ended up, the Theophilus Dana ended up coming down into that area of northeast Wyoming and the Crow Agency, the Crow Reservation, and started buying cattle in the 1880s. And E.L. Dana, Edwin, was the son who inherited that business and made it grow. He and Frey were married in 1896 in Parkman, Wyoming. That is to the left of the triangle. If you are in Sheridan and you're going up to Ranchester, Parkman's over here. So Parkman is close to Dayton, and they're all nestled up there in the northeast corner of Wyoming. Now, one would imagine that here's young Frey. You're soon going to know how come she ends up in 91 and 93 during the summertime going to Wyoming when she really wants to be in Cincinnati with her people studying art. She ends up coming to Wyoming, and she actually falls in love with this Edwin Dana, who's 10 years older than she is. But he's a poet. So he's a poet cattleman. So in addition to having his Herefords and having this investment, he also is someone who's very well read and actually writes poetry. And this book of poetry is something that you can actually read in the archives at the University of Montana. And most of the poems are, well, it's not quite Shakespeare, but they're very loving and dear and beautiful. They talk about the landscape and how beautiful it is to go with his beautiful wife out into this, into this open territory, how beautiful the weather is, how calm, how sunny. I mean, he's pretty good with the adjectives, I have to say. So now I'm going to give you this additional information, which I find really fascinating. And you're going to be able to not have to memorize this. There won't be a quiz. And I have to say that when I looked at this today, I thought, I can't send yet another PowerPoint to you, but this should be 92, not 95. So next time I'll be sending you like, oh, I have to fix this, because I kept sending Morgan these variations on my PowerPoint. That's Jewel Maxwell. They're on the right, seated with Frey later on in their lives. And Jewel, man, she was something. She had the first car in Parkman and drove it recklessly all over the ranch. She was someone who was very bright, eager, daring, and had a rich, full life, as you can see, because she was married 3 times. The first time she married John Broadwell, and John Broadwell is the dad of Frey, hence Frey Broadwell. Her dad was a Civil War veteran, and they were married. Her mom and her dad, John Broadwell, were married for maybe 2 years, maybe 2.5 years, when the judge, grandfather, and the father managed to get a divorce for her, which is a little unusual in that early time period. So Jewel was divorced from Broadwell, and he was maybe ill, maybe having a hard time dealing with the war, and he was out of the picture, maybe. Then she met and married James Dinwiddie. And it's the Dinwiddies that get this entire family to Wyoming. And maybe there are even some Dinwiddies here. But for sure, if you go into Sheridan, you will meet Dinwiddies. So they married in 1877. And it is this Dinwiddie who is the stepfather to Frey, who took her for the first time to Cincinnati and helped pay for the tuition. And she adored him and really did adore him. And then he died. He also was the father of Frey's half-sister, whom you see here, Edna, who's in a picture right around the corner, in two pictures, actually, portraits that Frey did of her half-sister. So what does Jewel, the mom, do? She marries the brother. So she marries James Dinwiddie's brother, William, and William is already buying cattle in Wyoming, and that is how, audience, poor Frey, now with a second Dinwiddie stepfather, ends up in Wyoming, in Dayton, and in Sheridan. And in fact, when you go to Sheridan, you can actually still see the Dinwiddie building. Here's the Diefenderfer and Dinwiddie hardware store. And there are other little Dinwiddie places all the way around. There's a Dinwiddie lake. There's a Dinwiddie dam along one of the irrigation ditches. So the Dinwiddies have left their mark. And I'm not going to go over and over and over again all of the little holdings here, but I just want to show you that it takes some time to get together 400,000 acres. And how you do it is you have your whole family engaged in getting these various acreages and improving them. So there's Dinwiddie, 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 Dana, Dana, Alisher. Well, the Alisher is someone who married into the family and they get some land too. And this is just in Wyoming. They also have land in southern Montana. Now remember too, when does Wyoming become a state? 1890. Montana became a state in 1889. So this statehood is just happening. This growth in these states are happening. Dana, Dana. The daughters, the wives, the brothers, the uncles, they're all getting these little pieces of land. But a puzzle that I haven't yet solved is up there on the far right. This is just along the border and it goes up into then Montana. It's John W. Broadwell. And for the longest time, I've wondered, what is he doing there? So I don't know if Jewel just wrote down her first husband's name or if John Broadwell actually ended up out there too. It's like this one little mystery in my life that I'm thinking about, like, why is John Broadwell's name there? And I think you could probably figure it out, but I just haven't spent the time doing it. So about 10 years ago, I ended up down there actually, this whole project, which initially, I'm just going to tell you, I was asked to do this project on Fra Dana, and I thought, well, how hard could that be? And I ended up actually studying Fra Dana from LA to East Aurora, upstate New York, Chicago, Cincinnati, and then Pass Creek, Wyoming. And so I went to Pass Creek, Wyoming. I met up with someone named Vandy, who is in Sheridan, who owns a Dinwiddie. And of course, if you own a Dinwiddie, that means you own a very early Fra Dana, right? Because she was then signing her name as Dinwiddie. So she hadn't married yet Edwin. So she has an actual early Fra Dana, which is a Fra Dinwiddie. And we got together and she goes, oh, I'm going to drive you out to Pass Creek so you can see it. So we went to Pass Creek and we looked at some of the irrigation projects that Edwin had been very active in, these irrigation projects. And apparently during this period in the early 20th century, late 19th century, early 20th century, there was a lot of investment in establishing these irrigation ditches so that you could enhance your cattle operation. Here's where the original ranch was, which is where Frey lived with Edwin until the 30s. And this is just some of the Herefords that they actually had on their ranch. So it's very large operation here, very large operation. And they were affluent, very affluent. It was called the 2A Bar Ranch. And she wrote this long letter to the dean at the University of Montana shortly after her husband's death, talking about the ranch. And she said, well, I just want to make clear that this was the 2A bar. That's how we called it. And one of the artists with whom she had established quite a close relationship, Joseph Sharp, who many of you may know. Joseph Sharp, of course, is renowned for his portraits of Native and Indigenous peoples. He knew her not only in Cincinnati, but also at the Crow Agency at the Crow Reservation, because the Danas would go there because their cattle were there, and they actually met Sharp when he was there painting portraits. And so Sharp visited their home and did landscape images of their ranch. So this actually says the ranch right here, 2A Bar Ranch. And I also have, let's see, this, let me see. There we go. Her stationery, of course, has this on it. And then I wanted to show this to you too, just because I'm trying to emphatically visualize for you the power of this family. The Alishirs, Alisher Dana, 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 Dana. Then up here, Dinwiddie, and as a matter of fact, Kearns, and also one other, Heinrich, were also familial additions to this familial, or one could say really collaborative project that included more than one family. So here's Frey at the 2A Bar Ranch. And I put these in because I said, oh my gosh, I didn't show you any photographs of Frey with a horse. So I'm going to show you one, and I'm going to show you a second one, because I felt like I really needed to emphasize that she was enormously comfortable on the ranch, and she really loved the ranch. And this is probably a good time for me to at least read you a couple of her own words so that you can hear her own voice here as she talks about it. Because I'm not only going to emphasize how happy she was there, I'm also eventually, of course, going to tell you how really miserable she sometimes was there. So she said, Mr. Dana and I went riding, and I rode my dear pickaninny, who will be a human the next time he lives. We came to a big box elder tree, and the sun was so hot we were sleepy. So we lay down out of the wind and went to sleep. The cattle came up and sniffed at us, and then went off and rubbed their hair, for it is springtime. Then later in the day, she said, there's so much snow still that I waded out to the mess house for dinner in Mr. Dana's rubber boots, almost snow blinded by the April glare. The floors were dirty over there, so is the oilcloth tablecloth, and the men smelled bad, and the dinner was swimming in grease. I ate some dried lima beans with catsup on them, and a piece of cold mince pie made of canned mincemeat. I mean, I think she's trying to make a point. And she goes on, also, there were 2 cattle dealers here this week, a surveyor and a woman selling tombstones. For all these people, I have to make their beds and empty their slops and wait on them. How the spirit doth rebel, especially at having to talk to them when they are not interesting. I love that. I think, oh yeah, I totally understand that. Totally understand that. So, and art. So she loves the ranch, she really does, but art is still something that she wants to do. And interestingly enough, when I was first doing this project and thinking, no, this is going to be a piece of cake, I should be able to wrap this up, in just a few weeks, I would go places like I was in the Centennial Valley, that just over the Monida Pass there in Centennial Valley, and we were visiting for some reason. I think I was picking up a kid or something. And the 2 women I met there said, oh, we know Fra Dana. She had a prenuptial agreement. And it was like 2 or 3 times I would hear this from people. So it was a story that was repeated that she had this prenuptial agreement. And so I did everything I could. I spent all this time looking for a prenuptial agreement. But I suspect what happened was that people had to come up for a reason that could explain how Edwin would let her get on a train and go to Chicago, and then she would go to New York City, and then she would go to Paris, and he stayed there at the ranch. And the way they explained that is they said, well, it has to be something legal. He would never do that if it wasn't some kind of arrangement that was had forced his hand. The law made him do this to allow her to go off like that. And so people kept talking about this prenuptial agreement, but I think it's just fantasy. I don't think there was ever any prenuptial agreement. But she did travel a lot, and she went to Chicago and New York in particular to study with this artist, William Merritt Chase, who was renowned for being able to paint in a white suit and not get himself dirty. He also ran a very popular painting a camp, sort of a painting camp at Shinnecock on Long Island, where what did they say? I've got this great quote. Where is it? Every summer bloomed with feminine beauty, or something like that, where you would go to Shinnecock and all you could see in this area would be these lovely women in, pastel clothes and big hats walking along and finding a place to paint plein air. So William Merritt Chase was renowned. He had a very important New York studio where he had students. And then he had this Shinnecock place during the summer. And women came from all over the country to study with William Merritt Chase. Not only women, men too. But he had a special flair for women. And he had a fabulous home in New York City, also a fabulous place out at Shinnecock. And people were very much welcomed there. And Frey was among that group who was welcomed into the home. She would go there for tea. She would learn ideas about how to decorate the interior of one's home. It's shocking to me how similar her home in Parkman looked to the homes that William Merritt Chase had in New York and Shinnecock, in terms of the very, little Japanese details, or this sort of painting over that, side chest. So one of the things that William Merritt Chase did as a teacher was he painted quickly and lightly. And he was one of the first to introduce a little bit more of the Impressionist touch. So, we would like to say sometimes when we look at paintings that they're licked. And my students always like that word or description, because licked means it's very highly finished. And Frey doesn't paint like that. And neither did William Merritt Chase. And she really learned from him this idea of painting quickly, spontaneously, so that when you look at the strokes in Frey's paintings, they're very much like this. They're like an Impressionist painting. He also had a little trick that he would do with his students. He would come in and he would have a critique, and then he'd say, someone from the audience come up. And then he would choose a young woman to come and sit down. And then within 10 minutes, he would do their portrait. Fast. Just quickly make this portrait. And it was one of the things that he did. And he did one of Frey. And so here's Frey. And this is in the collection at the Montana Museum of Art and Culture. And she was the selected individual who sat up front and waited, the student who waited. And he then did this quick rendition, really a rendering of Frey, and captured her facial expression, very serious, but look at how quickly this whole idea of the garment, the fur, the light lavender blue at the top here, and her blouse, very quickly painted. And of course, William Merritt Chase loved Franz Hals, whom you probably know also has this touch, and Velasquez. In fact, he named one of his 10 children Helen Velasquez, not a name you hear very much. And Frey was so close with Helen and Dorothy, 2 of the 10 children, that they corresponded for the next 30 years. So there's all sorts of correspondence with Helen and Dorothy, the daughters of William Merritt Chase, over 30 years that you have in correspondence in the archives at the university. Frey went so often to the East Coast that Edwin and Frey bought an apartment in Murray Hill. And Murray Hill was known as the upscale neighborhood in the early 1900s. It had gorgeous brownstones, and that's where she went. She would usually leave in late September. Edwin would actually say, I know you're going to be miserable here. The weather's going to get worse, so you may as well just go to New York and eventually just go to Paris. And she would. She would go to New York, hang out with her friends. She had good friends there. She'd go to the symphony. She'd go to a concert. She could go to the museums. And of course, she probably saw William Merritt Chase. And then for so long in my head, I thought, well, Frey, because she wrote so often about going to Billings, and she could go to Billings and get something like fresh fruit. She would say, oh my gosh, I actually got a strawberry in Billings. Never even thought of Billings as a strawberry place. But she would talk about being able to go to Billings on a special trip with Edwin to have a nice dinner away from Parkman, where she wasn't responsible. And so I always imagined that she would have to go to Billings in order to go to the East Coast. But in fact, I now think she probably took the Burlington, which actually had all of these spurs on this line right here in Northeast Wyoming. And she probably came right through to get to Chicago. So this is how she probably got to Chicago, because she talks about I have to just get to Chicago. And then she'd get to Chicago, and from Chicago, she could then get to New York City. And she did this pretty frequently throughout the 1890s and up through probably up to about 1925, even 30, she did this. Then she also, by herself, would go to London and Paris. And so it's remarkable how much information you can find by going through the old manifests. And honestly, you can't imagine the joy that I would have when I would be going through these manifests and I'd see Fra Dana. I would just be like, Fra Dana. And I really started to have like this, I'd feel like, I'm with you, Frey. I know exactly what you're up to. She went on the Lusitania in 1914. And of course, in 1915, they blew it up off the coast of Ireland. So she was on the Olympic just months before the sister ship, the Titanic, went down. So I could follow her. I'd be like, oh, I'm so glad you're not on the Titanic. But the Olympic, and then she's on the Lusitania, and I'd be actually waiting and hoping that she'd be okay. Of course she was, but it was just great to see how she would go back and forth. And she would go to the piers in New York City, get on a ship, go to Paris, and stay months in Paris. One year, she actually had a studio in Paris. I want to make clear for you that she would usually paint back home. She would do all of this and then would come back home to Parkman to paint. This is her in what I like to think of as her sophisticated East Coast and Europe outfit. And for a long time, I thought, why is she wearing a swastika necklace? Well, it turns out that Frey, in addition to the 113 artworks she left the University of Montana, she also left over 2,300 books with a list of all of the books carefully typed up by her. So I could go through all of the books and figure out what she was reading. Theosophy, Hinduism, spiritualism. She was deeply into all of that, hence the swastika. And then I started to get into this whole swastika thing, and it turns out that in the early years of the 20th century, it was extraordinarily popular. Women's magazines were telling you how to make centerpieces that were swastikas, food items that looked like a swastika, all sorts of hat pins and brooches and necklaces, because it had this association with Eastern religions and this symbol of eternity. It was long before it had associations with Arianism and Hitler's Nazism. But here she is in this sophisticated outfit. And of course, I really liked it because it looks so much like this Matisse. And this is also about the time when she's actually visiting and going to the salon that Gertrude and Leo Stein had in Paris. And she actually writes about this. She goes to their salons. She hangs out and talks. She even describes Gertrude as being sort of a rough woman who wore a brown jacket hanging down to her knees. And she doesn't say it nicely either. I mean, she's like, ugh. But here you can see that Matisse work on the wall. And I want to say that I was a little bit disappointed in Frey, but I guess it's just who she was. But she never embraced modernism. I mean, you can tell, right? She never was someone who said, oh, I can't wait. I love this new Picasso. I'm crazy about Matisse. Instead, she was very off. She was put off by it. She didn't like it at all. She thought she would say about her friend Alfie Maurer, just a moment, she'd say, well, Alfie knows how to draw. Why is he doing that? Because Alfie Maurer, her friend, who introduced her to many of the scenes in Paris, Alfred Maurer, was painted very much like her until he started to see Picasso and Matisse. And then he went to the dark side. And in fact, Alfred Maurer was one of the people who was actually shown at Stieglitz's gallery in New York City, the 291. And at the time, Alfred Maurer was considered like a raving madman because his art was so abstract and modern. It was so modern that, and of course, Frey was like, She was very close to the Maurers. She went to their family home in New York City. She knew Alfie very well. And she was devastated when in 1932 he took his own life. And she was deeply and profoundly hurt by that. Interestingly, and I just have to tell you this too, he was a closeted gay man at the time. And when there was an exhibition in the 40s of his work, most of it modern, the curators at the Walker Art Museum in Minneapolis were writing to Frey because they knew they had this close friendship. And Elizabeth McCausland, who was the curator there, wrote to Frey and said, well, what can you tell me about, his sexuality? Even at the time, in the 40s, they were curious about this. And Frey was like, that's none of my business. And I would never, ever tell you anything about what Alfie was doing in Paris or anything like that. It was his business. She was very proper about that sort of thing. And she didn't feel that that was anything that she should be talking about. But they were very close. Lots and lots of correspondence between the two of them. But Alfie was definitely an urban person. He was in Paris and New York City. He never came out to Parkman, Wyoming. But he did paint beautifully alongside Frey in Paris. So this is a Paris street scene at night by Alfie. I call him Alfie because whenever you see him actually referred to, it's Alfie, even though it's Alfred. And then there's this gorgeous work, which is in the collection in Montana. And this was really the masterpiece or the great work by Alfred Maurer of his model, Gabrielle. And this cloak, this beautiful cloak, was also gifted to the museum, and we have it. And Frey is wearing it in one of the paintings in the gallery. So she received this as a gift, and she was very, very much connected and attached to this painting. And actually, Edwin helped her buy it. I mean, together they were certain to buy this because Alfie needed the money. That's kind of a direct quote. She said, I never want to lend that. So even when the Walker Art Center said, could we please have this work? She said, nope, it's never going to be out of my sight. I always have it in my home so that I can look at it every day. So this is in one of her sitting areas. And she really was very attached to this painting and to Alfred Maurer. And of course, when she's writing those words to the Walker, he had already passed. So both art and ranch. She is someone who's going to do both art and ranch. Here she is with Edwin. Remember, they're married for 50 years, so something must have gone right? But they had this, their communication with one another reveals this deep respect for one another. He honored her. He built her a beautiful studio in their home in Parkman, Pass Creek. And she painted. And she painted in a way that was somewhat light, but I still think that there are passages here that seem to have sort of this heaviness that comes from both her experiences in Cincinnati and also her experiences with William Merritt Chase. It doesn't have the same sense of pastel lightness that, let's say, the Impressionists have. But here's breakfast. You can see that she's quite refined. She has beautiful china, things from Japan. Edwin would get her, buy her beautiful things and have them shipped to her home so that she had she was surrounded by beautiful things. Mary Cassatt. She studied with Mary Cassatt when she was in Paris. And I'd stand there and think, really? How did that happen? Mary Cassatt never had a student. In fact, Mary Cassatt was like, well, maybe you can come to my house for tea. But she wasn't going to teach anybody anything. And so Mary Cassatt did have Frey and any number of other young women who were studying in Paris, painting, come outside of Paris to her home and sit and have tea with her. But she was not a teacher. But surely Frey, again, would have had this model, much older than she, but someone who had been successful as a painter. So I think that this idea of having a tea set, she had a tea set and women having tea was something that she thought, oh, well, that's something that you paint. You paint tea sets and women having tea. And of course, this is also Cassatt. Do you see how the palette is somewhat lighter? It's like everything has white added to it, so that there's this lightness to the application here. I'm pretty sure this is a pastel. You can almost see the chalk on it. But the background here and this idea of a woman and child is something that you see in Frey's work. So she's in some way, I think, emulating Mary Cassatt, but there wasn't any official training there, even though she would have known her very well. And then here's Frey seated in her home, surrounded by probably some of those 2,300 books that she left to the museum. And there's the bird cage that I'm also pretty sure is in the painting that's out here in the gallery right now, because she's painting what she has in her home, and she's made her home into something that, well, you could be in New York, or you could be in Paris. You didn't, you're in you're outside of Parkman on Pass Creek, but your home looks pretty much like a place that you would expect. Today, when you go to the museum, to the library, I don't know how many of you are on campus these days with students, but now libraries are really places to drink your coffee and visit with your friends. Sometimes accidentally a child will have to go to the shelf and get a book that isn't available on the computer. And when they do, they might accidentally take a book off and open it and see the book plate of Fra Dana. Now, I am, mature enough, I use that term now, to know that I like to go there, and I go to the Velasquez section because I know she had all these books on Velasquez. So I can go to that section, I just take out the books, and pretty soon there's a Fra Dana book. So it's lovely to know that those books are still in the collection. I just need to tell you about Elbert Hubbard because I made my special trip to East Aurora, New York, to go to Elbert Hubbard's city. He died on the Lusitania. He did. So she managed to survive a couple of trips on Lusitania. He did not. But Elbert Hubbard is a part of our American arts and crafts movement. And maybe you know some of that Roycroft furniture. It's very much like Gustav Stickley. And Frey was crazy about it. And for a long time, I thought that the magazine that he actually put out called Fra might have been connected to Frey. But of course, he had a Fra magazine because it was friar. Fra, it was this idea of medieval guilds getting together. And so he had this magazine that he had that he actually, that Frey had. So I thought, maybe Frey thought it was her. She had this magazine, but he did these beautiful magazines and gorgeous, gorgeous furniture in that arts and crafts style. And he was a visitor to Parkman and to the Pass Creek Ranch. He'd come out there and visit and see her, and they were quite close. So she was a long ways away from things, but people did come and visit her. Here's a portrait of Frey by Alfie, actually, about to paint. And then here's Sharp. So I just want to say a few words about Sharp. Sharp came to the ranch quite a bit. He left paintings there. There are very fine collection pieces that Frey left to the university by Joseph Sharp, including these works of the ranch. So it's lovely to have these. And I think that maybe one or two of them are here. One of them, maybe no, you don't. It's the Frey ones that are actually like this that make me think that maybe they were together, working together. So then Frey's paintings. See what I mean? I think she's working alongside Joseph Sharp here while she's painting. Oh, there's Gabrielle's cloak from Alfie, which is here in the room. This, I think, is one of her better paintings, actually. It has a lot of light, and the touch is very light. And I like the way I can see the strokes in the colors that she has and how the colors are seemingly contained. She did a lot of still lifes, and that makes sense. If you're alone and you don't get a lot of models, you can use a still life or a landscape. And a still life is something you can come back to and paint, and things usually don't move. And that's really nice for an artist. So she has some fairly lovely still life paintings that she does. She was big into flowers. She had great flower gardens at her ranch. And there are lots of them, peonies, just really lovely works. But do you see how heavy the colors are? A little heavy in terms of the coloration here. And I'm just going through these quickly so you can see. This is one of my favorites, actually, just because I'm a big fan of both turkeys and hollyhocks. then I can't help myself. I mean, I could be here all night. I promise I won't. I'm going to check my time right now. Oh, 3 more minutes. So I had no idea what a colonial dame was. I had no idea what a colonial dame was. Oh my goodness. But I had all these letters about being a colonial dame and how she and Jewel, her mom, were going to make sure that they got all of their genealogy set up so they could be colonial dames. And sure enough, among the very careful records are this letter telling Mrs. Edmund, it's actually Edwin, but they said Edmund, Lester Dana, that you have the honor to be a colonial dame. And so I went to the National Society of Colonial Dames in Boston and was met by a very proper and lovely woman who led me upstairs to show me the jewelry of Fra Dana that was left to the colonial dames in Boston. So all of this special, portraits of her ancestors, all sorts of memorial braided hair, bracelets and lockets, all that stuff is in a little cupboard in Boston with the colonial dames. I mean, and it's a prestigious organization, right? It's an organization of women who can trace their ancestry back to the colonial times. And so she did it. And then her mother also was able to get, uh-oh, maybe I'm stuck. Just a second. Let me see. Here. Yeah, there we go. Oh, I'll just use this. Can I do that? How did you do that? There I go. I think good now. So then she did the Daughters of the American Revolution. I think she thought, well, I went back that far. I'm sure I can also become a Daughters of the American Revolution. So she also did that. And then let me see if this works now. Yes. So this is this very prized object that is actually in the collection too. So I've seen this. I did not ever wear this. When I did go to the Colonial Dames place in Boston, they did allow me to put the jewelry on. And it was really great, I have to say. But then the mom also got her name in there too, because, well, if Frey is going to be one, I mean, for sure the mom is, right? So Juliet or Jewel also got her, her certificates as well. And then I just want you to know the Maxwells, as I told you earlier, had this very prestigious, the mom has a very prestigious history in Indiana. They have their own genealogy, and physicians, by the way, have their own section in the genealogy. There were so many of them. In the early 30s, Frey and her husband gave up on Wyoming and the ranching. They moved to Cascade County outside of Great Falls. Well, Great Falls is part of Cascade County in Montana, and they bought a much smaller ranch where Edwin continued to ranch, but with a much smaller herd of cattle. She moved into the Blackstone Apartments, where she lived in Great Falls because she had cancer. She had uterine or ovarian cancer. She needed to be close to good medical care. And I've actually gotten in there as far as the door. As far as the door, 305 was her apartment, and that's as far as I've gotten. I wrote to the people who lived at 305 and said, could I please get into the apartment? She went to Sloan Kettering to be treated for her cancer, left them a generous gift at the time of her death, and then also spent a considerable time at Deaconess Hospital in Great Falls, where she died. And then I just want to say that, of course, her funeral, her burial was at in Great Falls. Her husband's not there. Her husband's down by the ranch in Parkman. Yeah, I was curious. You can actually go to many of the legal documents here in Cascade County and see how she left her distributions. And it's all those people that we saw earlier on those maps telling us who owned what. And I'm not going to do this, but I'm just going to show you the slide. Her sister, Edna, got her annuity and $500. And this is her sister's life. The sister was a librarian and moved a lot. And she was in California, she was in New Jersey, she'd been in Michigan, back in California, and she actually ended up back at the Blackstone in Blackstone Apartments with her sister for a short while. Then after the mom died, here she is with her her library truck or car. I think that's so great. And then of course, several of these are here, so you can see them. The Montana Historical Society has some things by Frey, her beloved piano, and some brass candlesticks that show up in one of her still life paintings. And then the Shodair wing of the Children's Home in Montana received a generous gift from her will. And they have a lovely memory of both Edwin and Frey, who was a loving wife, steadfast in adversity, modest in success, an artist and lover of great books, courageous in affliction. She found joy in helping others. And then, I think I just have this last thing. Yes, you can go to the archive and see very many letters and poems and all sorts of things here in Montana. And then I have my power image here that I want to show at the very end. Yes, it's the heating tunnels. Now, this is when the mystery happens. Why am I showing you heating tunnels? Where do you think the 113 paintings and collected items that Frey had when they went to the University of Montana in 1949, where do you think they went? They went in the heating steam tunnels. And I'm going to make it even better for you, because they went in the heating tunnels because there was no museum. And we had to wait, and we had to wait, and we had to wait a long time. And in fact, one of the paintings out there of a young boy named Breeding was in the steam tunnels and then ended up at a garage sale and ended up in Kentucky and only was returned to the University of Montana within the last year and a half. So the painting you see out there was in Kentucky 2 years ago because it was there, and so many works have just gone. They're just gone. So we're lucky that we have the works that we do have, because in the early 1980s, a very brave person went into the steam tunnels and said, oh, these are paintings. We should do something with these. And he recognized names like Alfie Mahler and William Merritt Chase and Fra Dana and brought them upstairs and dusted them off. And now they are finally in our beautiful new museum, which we now have had and enjoyed for a little over 1 year. So that's a long time. So this is my last image of Frey, and I hope that that was enjoyable for you. And then now you know a little bit more about Frey. 5 minutes for questions, but I have a plant in the audience.
Let's start with that one. I wondered how in the world somebody like this would get oil paintings and good brushes and canvases in art in Wyoming.
But now you probably know.
Brought them back.
Yes, sure.
Paris.
Yeah, or New York.
Or
Yeah,
New York
yeah.
or Chicago.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But
So
if you were living there and needed cad yellow, what would she do?
she'd say, I'm going to wait till September when I go back to New York City, right? Yeah, so you've heard the question, right? Like, where would she get canvases and paints and brushes? But certainly when she was going to these urban centers, that's where she was like getting things. There's one reference about one of her ranch hands, Old Rat. Is he here? Old Rat is here. He would help her make canvases. So, he would make the frame and then she could get the canvas over that.
But she never had children.
She did not have children, no. And I think that this is also, clearly this is one of the ways or reasons why she could go, right? She could go because she wasn't there taking care of children. She couldn't very well leave, 2, 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Plus she lived. So, so many people, even at that time were still, not surviving childbirth. So she lived quite a full life. And one of the reasons was probably not having children. Sorry. Sorry. I have children too, but sometimes you have to say what you have to say. Yeah.
She had friends that she went to in Chicago and Paris and all that.
Yeah.
Did she have contacts there?
Oh, so many, like the Maurers, she was like part of their family. Alfie would have her come over, she'd see the dad, and the dad worked for, oh, who's the famous lithographers? Not Currier and Ives, or maybe it was Currier and Ives. He was one of the producers in that business of those engravings and the colored engravings. She would travel alone. She may have had someone who accompanied her and helped her with things, but she did not have anyone with her. She traveled alone. When you see the manifests, Fra Dana. Yep. I mean, it's remarkable. Really, it's remarkable. I have a very soft place for Frey. I really got attached to her quite a bit because she was so brave. Great. Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Me? Oh. Well, so, I initially thought, oh, Fra Dana. Who's Fra Dana? This shall be easy. But once you started to discover, the things that I kind of, my sources were ship manifests, the American Register, census records, American Library Association, the police crime records, the probate records, school records in Cincinnati, New York City, and Chicago, genealogical records, obituaries, correspondence, library lists. Pretty soon I was, like I say, I kind of got into it, and it really made me think all of us should write down like our lives. No, because, you think, oh, my life's not so great, or isn't so important, I should say. We can have rich lives, but you're like, yeah, what's so great about my life? But, I thought, wow, I would really like to know more about when she was on the Lusitania. Or I would like to know more about how she got from Parkman to Chicago to New York. Like, was she schlepping all that stuff with her? Or did she just use porters when she was smart? She'd get to Chicago and she'd say, well, now I need porters to help me get this stuff here. And then I have to catch the train, the next train. Women did do that. Now, interestingly, when she's in Paris, she has Alfie. And I don't think, and Cassatt had Degas. All these women had sort of chaperones when they were in Paris. But I think in New York, she pretty boldly walked around and did whatever she wanted to do. And I admired that in her. I also admired that she had this double life, because I feel like I have a double life. When I'm here, I can say, oh, I love it. It's so beautiful. And then I'll say, oh my gosh, I just want to be in a city. And she has this beautiful quote that I didn't tell you because I'm kind of running out of time, but she says, New York, New York, New York. I'm so glad to be back here. The people are rude and it's dirty, but oh my gosh, this is so great. She's just like, I'm so glad that I'm almost getting hit by traffic, right? Because she suffered. She suffered a little bit. Yeah. Do you have that feeling? Mm-hmm.
And obviously, they were very affluent. We talked a little bit about not too much. So did you follow anything along that to see if maybe she did come to
Yeah.
And the second thing is, she and her husband had this very long relationship, but wasn't sexual, and maybe she was gay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because of all the Valentine poems in the poetry book, it makes me think that they did have a relationship that was a heterosexual relationship. I'm not going to dismiss it because who knows, but she never reveals any of that to her. She's quite proper about all of that. And so unlike Cameron, she's not a Cameron, right? So she's not wearing the pants like this and sitting on a natural bridge with a camera. She's not doing that, right? She's like having tea in Parkman. So, I'm believing that about Evelyn Cameron. She's hanging out with her women friends, and it's more than just hanging out with your women friends. There's all sorts of relationships there that seem convincing. I think the relationship she had with her husband was one that was truly a love match. But the affluence thing too, for sure, she had money. that Maxwell family had wealth. And then, of course, they were all there. The Dinwiddies were there, the Danas were there, and together they were amassing this, I mean, this great mass of land that then generated income through the cattle. Yeah, it's remarkable. And then to have that wealth to be able to do that. I mean, she wasn't doing this because she did this because she could, because of her wealth. Yeah.
Do we know, and if we don't, do you think she knew the other women painters that we exhibit here? Hale,
I
Lowry?
know.
Because it was like.
I know. Maybe Hale. I doubt she knew Cameron. I doubt she knew Cameron. You were asking about Olive Fell, and you think maybe that's about the same time? I mean, I don't know because she doesn't say anything really in her records about local people. She really doesn't. She doesn't talk about local people. She was probably a little bit standoffish, maybe an elitist. I mean, she probably thought, like, you could hear in her letter when she says, you know, and in fact, one of the things she says is, oh, when I go to New York, it's so lovely because they know how to speak English here. I mean, really, she's, you know, she's a little snooty. So she will say these things through her letters and journals, and I'll think, okay, you know. But it wasn't always easy to be going back and forth. So I thank you very much. It's really lovely that you came.